excited to be sitting down with Tinker Hatfield.
It's a lot of fun to be here. It's a little bit outside of my normal zone, but art and design, really is universal pretty much. So I feel like this is a fun opportunity to talk to some other creatives.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think we have a lot of things in common, just as far as what you do outside of your day job and things. With surfing and motorcycles, and we come from skate background and things like that, and you do a lot of that stuff outside of work.
Yeah,
so.
It's kind of like there's quite a menu of ways to get injured.
Absolutely, that's what they all are. Yeah, and the motorcycle being the biggest one. I feel.
I think that could be at the top of the pyramid of injury-prone kind of activities.
Absolutely.
But I'm a little bit of a risk taker, so it's been part of my character. Over the years.
Even with track, I think of your origin story into how you started designing shoes is sort of like a superhero origin story. Like you get that injury on your foot, and it kind of sidelines you from being able to compete as an athlete. So you have to compete as a shoe designer.
Yeah, I think there is some truth to the fact that if you have something that goes wrong, it just makes you become more resourceful. I think to try and do something, out of the ordinary. Yeah. So it's, the injury definitely put a crimp on my aspirations as an athlete. But luckily I had something else to fall back on, or to get interested in. So there you go. Yeah.
I don't want to give a whole history on you. I think a lot of people listening will know who you are and kind of that history. I do think it's interesting, the architectural background and start you had, and then into product design and shoe design, and kind of how that translated. I think that's just an interesting way to start, because we have a lot of people here that started, in two of our illustrators basically went to school for animation.
Mm-hmm.
I hired them as illustrators, and then from their whole career is illustration. So I do think some people start in one facet of design, and then as you evolve, you kind of end up doing something else, which is cool and fun.
Right. Well, when we look at prospective designers at where I work at Nike and Jordan brand, sometimes we find that people from outside of the industry, bring a fresh approach, and so for me, switching from architecture to product design, which still does include some apparel, you kind of have maybe an advantage sometimes, because you're not so conventional when you jump into yet another genre. Yeah.
Totally. I even think of you growing up, you played multiple sports.
Yeah.
You played music, or you play music.
Yeah.
And there's a long history of this. Steve Jobs went to school around here and studied calligraphy.
Calligraphy at Reed College. That's right.
The current MVP in the NBA, Joel Embiid, didn't pick up a basketball till he was 16. He was a soccer player.
Right.
And you're sort of considered one of the inventors of the cross trainer. And I was thinking about that idea of cross training and design and art, of having different approaches. And if you're too myopic on just design, you have to live, you have to do other things in order to bring that to your work.
Yeah, I've been asked this question a few times, which is, do you ever get stuck, right? But I never get stuck, because I say that every time you sit down and design something or draw something on your iPad or on a piece of paper, it's kind of a result. What you draw is a result of everything that you've seen, done, or experienced in your life up to that very point.
Yeah, and I do think a lot of young designers, you talk about inspiration for a project, or hey, go out and find some ideas. they'll go right to the internet, right to other designers' websites.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the wrong approach. You know?
People ask me, well, what other designers do you like? I'm like, I don't even pay attention.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, like the history of like even just like some of those Jordan shoes, it's like the inspiration is not necessarily another artist. It's like a Black Panther. It's Ferrari.
Yeah,
it's tuxedos. Like there's all of these different really abstract things, and maybe you could talk about like what is your process for taking something that's like super far out?
I sort of think about storytelling before I draw anything. So, and I let the story sort of help guide the direction that I go as I design. So to make a kind of use the Michael Jordan analogy, I would like start off, well, there's one narrative is really built around how he plays the game, right? And what he needs and what can help him be better and help and maybe the shoe can be better. And so there's a lot of criteria built into that. That's more performance driven, scientifically driven, and I think that's a story. It's a story in and of itself, and you could sort of work off of that. But so then the second narrative, though, I do three usually. The second narrative is, so what's his personality like? What's he thinking about off the court? What are his interests? What are my interests? You know, kind of like trying to find kind of this off the court, away from the sport sort of narrative. And then there's a third one that I like to talk about, which is I'll just see something on the street, like a really cool motorcycle or a cool car, or go to a concert. There can be a story from that, and so that would be a third narrative. You know, it's just out of thin air almost. One in particular was like thinking, well, shoot, I need to come up with something. I walked by a record store when they had record stores. There's some. Maybe there's still a couple.
There's a few.
But anyway, it was a small record store in my neighborhood, and there was a big poster in the window of the store, and it was all about Afro-pop worldwide. This poster was really well done. It was a really cool piece of art, but it's very, very stylized, and that gave me that third narrative. You know, just the poster. And I went in and tried to get the poster.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, "Get out of here! You can't have the poster." And so I'm like, "Oh." So I went home, and then the next day I went back. And I said, "Are you sure? I'll buy the poster from you." And he's like, "No, it's not for sale." I said, "Well," and then I decided. Then I told him that I was designing the next Air Jordan. And I thought that the inspiration, part of the inspiration, was coming from his store window. Yeah. And when he heard that, he just gave me the poster.
That's cool.
So
that's great.
So there's the name drop.
I had to do the. Yeah. Finally had to drop that. I don't do that very often, but had to, and it got me that poster, and I was able to kind of I think infuse some of the energy from that poster into that.
I'm imagining like a Fela Kuti poster, like Tony, the drummer from that band. Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool.
There, I mean, it has this sort of jagged, sort of like tribal art that maybe could be reminiscent of something you'd see in West Africa.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it keeps the work alive when there are those layers that kind of reveal themselves. Like on one level, you might just think it's cool, but it continues to evolve the more you look at it and interact with it.
And I would do the design work, and it doesn't happen this way anymore. Everything's gotten so big and complicated, and there's intellectual property, and the lawyers don't want you to show anything. But I used to go, after I would finish the design on most of these shoes in a previous kind of era, I would take it right down to Wyden and Kennedy, and tell them the whole story.
Right. So
now, and I didn't expect them to do an ad using my story or my stories, because there were usually three of them. Yep. But I just wanted them to know, when they were going to do the ad, I just wanted them to kind of just know more about how I arrived at design solution.
Yep.
And most of the time, that didn't really impact the commercial work. But in some ways, it probably did in a more of at a subliminal level,
For sure.
And
Yeah.
and I did an air raid, an outdoor basketball shoe one time. And
Classic. The outdoor basketball shoe.
The outdoor basketball
Still.
shoe was really cool, and it was a lot of fun to work on. And I thought, I went into some neighborhoods they probably shouldn't have been in, but to try and sort of understand what was going on in outdoor basketball. But that shoe had kind of this Performance X strap on the top of it, and I happened to know at the time that, and I'm know Spike Lee a little bit. He was working on this Malcolm X movie, and so everybody sort of came out that when the shoe came out, everybody's like, "Oh, Malcolm X." And really, what it was just it was like a tape job, as using straps as a tape job. So that shoe had this urban edginess, and it had the big X strap. And then that did inspire the advertising. My store, when I went in to talk to White and Kennedy, they did an ad and they painted these courts and they had Spike Lee actually do the commercials. Cool. And that's when they had guys playing it and starting to get into an argument, and and it was and then they ended up like working it all out and everything was good. And the courts were all kind of color in different crazy colors, and
that's cool.
And so I felt like that was probably one time when I went in to explain the design, and I think they sort of embodied that design story into the actual advertising.
That's
so
cool.
A little bit more than normal. So
that's great.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Do you ever find, so you kind of go through these three narratives, do you ever find that then you present the shoe or it goes through the channels, like say at a Nike, and sales or somebody tries to throw in like the fourth narrative as of like, how is this going to sell? How does this visually look? You know what I mean? Because you are designing for Jordan and the athlete to play in this shoe, but I would think that the company behind it at some point goes, yes, great, but will it sell to the general public?
Will it sell? Yeah.
Like,
so that would always pop up, and because. Well, it depends on what kind of product you're working on. If you're working on product that where you're trying to move like basketball shoes to a new place in design and performance, both, they're not going to look like the shoes before them. Yeah. They're just going to be different. And of course, that scares the salespeople.
Absolutely.
That scares the hell out of them.
Yeah.
We can't sell that. I mean, that's too crazy. Nobody's going to like that. And then they would go out and they'd do a focus group. Then they would come back and I'd have yet another meeting where they're like, we can't sell this. There's no way. You got to change it. And I was ready. So I had Michael Jordan's like landline phone number in my back pocket on a card. And I just lay the card on the table. If you guys don't think you can sell this shoe and you want to change it, you need to call Michael Jordan and tell him you don't like his shoe, because he was with me all along and he's approved it and it's done and here it is. Yeah. This is what Michael and I think is the right approach. I mean, sometimes that does feel like it's a bit of a dirty trick, but on the other hand, everybody benefited.
Yeah, absolutely.
And had we listened to all that concern, negativity, relative to what they've sold in the past, then you're not moving anything anywhere. So.
Sure, like with the Air Max 1, it's the sales team is telling you, we can't do it, and then they come back after booking whatever 1 million sales after a week, and you get a standing ovation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I had never even been to a sales meeting. That was my first shoe. I didn't even know what a sales meeting was. So I'm hanging out in the back, and somebody said, "Yeah, you need to go to the sales meeting." The Air Max, the Air Trainer, and the Air Revolution, the Air Safari, and the Air. All those were unbriefed projects that I had done, and I felt like Nike was in a rut. They basically said, "No, we're not. People are going to puncture that." how can you wear a shoe with a hole in it?
Yeah, but why not just show it? You know, it's not a bad idea to let people actually see what an airbag looks like. As a matter of fact, I've got a drawing here that actually shows what a shoe could look like with a visible window in the heel.
There was a patron of sorts who was a big shot at Nike. He was looking at this shoe and he goes, I don't get it. I see, but we're betting the farm on it because there's nothing else. And the thing just went like a rocket ship and all over the world, like boom. He didn't know what to think of it,
right?
But he just knew that Nike was not, needed
something
a kick in
new.
the pants,
Yeah.
right? So for the designers who are watching this, I would encourage people to try and be collaborative, but in the end, though, you still sort of if your job is to sort of push it a little bit, you have to be a little bit fearless and
You got to stand behind your work,
and you have to stand behind it, and then maybe you pull a few dirty tricks to get it through.
Yeah.
push through.
You just mentioned collaboration, which is something we wanted to touch on as it relates to some of the Nike SB stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely.
There's sort of like the well-known lore that Nike tried to enter skateboarding in the 90s, and
Yep.
it didn't work.
Did not. Nope.
And then, but if you
6.0.
fast forward to today, like Nike SB is probably the biggest skateboarding brand in the world at this point.
Yeah, numbers would indicate something similar to
Yeah.
that.
And I feel like how they got there is they took page 1 out of the Tinker playbook, in that like the problem before was they didn't collaborate with the athlete, the
Right.
skater.
Right.
And when they went back to it, the work that Sandy did was like, let's go back to the roots. And some of the roots is your work with basketball shoes.
Yeah.
And learning the skaters and
Yeah.
collaborating with them.
I think the collaborating with people like Paul Rodriguez is an example. He's a great
P-Rod,
guy,
yep.
easy to talk to. Grew up learning tricks on the backside of an Albertsons.
Yep. The loading dock.
supermarket,
Yep.
loading dock,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And even though his dad was kind of a well-known comedian, he pretty much was just a kid in the street, kind of doing what he, and it was really fun to talk to him and then work and then talk about some of these other projects that he was a fan of, and
Yeah.
that's. You're right. It's sort of like it sort of builds a little bit of confidence because in order for a team to be a well-oiled machine and to be collaborative in the right way, you have to have confidence in each other. You have to trust each other. Yeah.
Well, good thing you did that, because now we got SB and 6.0 is gone, and
Sandy Bodecker was an incredible force of nature. And he really felt like he kind of knew after that first failure that they needed sort of to go and have a building dedicated to this different kind of customer, and even though there were some of the design inspiration might be coming from Nike, they really sort of set up their own kind of almost like their own company, so they could at least not be tied down to some of the restrictions that might come through the bigger side of the corporate machine.
Yeah.
So it was great. I'd go over there to the building, and there's people skateboarding all over the place,
cool.
and there's crazy music playing, and it was a lot more loose and fun, which it would be underneath the Burnside Bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Yep.
not exactly a tidy little
Yeah.
corporate place. It's homegrown, and
Absolutely.
they were trying to do. I think that's what really happened, and that's why I think Nike became more authentically a part of the skate scene.
That's cool.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that world can smell it out. You've worked a ton in skateboarding, and the reason people have gone to you and us here at Lincoln is because they know that you are a part of that community and you get it.
Absolutely.
You don't have to do the translation. You can just speak the same language.
Yeah, I think that language issue is really important, and maybe that gave me a bit of an edge when it came to designing sneakers for athletes, because I was one.
Exactly. Yeah.
All athletes sort of have this sort of mentality about, well, I'm just going to do whatever it takes training wise, and then to win. And of course, part of winning is also having the right sneakers, the right racket, whatever, and apparel that doesn't bunch up or constrict. I mean, so those things are. I was able to like totally understand it, and have this conversation. So
you are the client, you are the consumer.
I wasn't that far away
Yeah.
from being, in that the situation that the athlete was in.
Yeah.
So that helps collaboration for sure. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that mentality you talk about. I mean, at this point, you're a pretty chill, relaxed guy, and you were an athlete, and I'm assuming very competitive, training as an athlete. But in design, do you have that competitiveness?
It used to be a little bit of a problem, I think, because I always felt like I was in competition with other designers, not just around. I mean, not that I was looking at anybody's work, but I just felt like there was this competitiveness, from other companies, but also just within Nike, because we have so many people that are good, that are creative, and so for me, I just spent more time. I just would spend all night and come in with the biggest and best presentations, and that's being competitive, right? And trying to get your stuff through, and then of course, there's like you have to get it through the corporate sort of maze, and then into the retail world, and then of course people then have
The
to
sales need to come in,
they
and
have to come out, and then ultimately somebody has to like put some hard-earned cash down on the table to actually get the product. So there's a lot of waypoints along the way where things could go a little bit off, and we try to minimize those by having the correct insight in the first place. So
that's cool. What are your thoughts on, what does it look like 5 years from now for a designer, like whether it's shoe product at Nike, outside, advertising, whatever that is, with like AI and what's going on in our industry right now?
That's a good, I think looking into the future is part of what designers should be doing, because in a very real way, what you're working on maybe at the moment might not actually become a real thing for a year or two.
Absolutely.
Somewhere in between. And so you have to be sort of designing for something somebody in the future, because it just doesn't happen, right? I mean, the product just doesn't. The turnaround is long, and if you're designing a car, it's real
I can't
long.
imagine. Yeah.
If you're designing a motorcycle, it takes a lot of engineering and a lot of kind of testing to get that design through, and that's the same. And Nike has for a typical product, and 16 to 18 month metabolism. You have to sort of replenish. But for the more technical stuff, it might be 3 or 4 years before because it has to go through so much testing. You have to become a futurist, I think, to be a good sort of leading edge type designer. And how do you do that? I don't know. It's a little bit of voodoo. I mean, it's a little bit of like, I don't know. You have to go out and sort of pay attention and see what's going on today. But then you also have to just be a bit of a risk taker, I mean, and kind of maybe make some educated guessing. But in the end, it's a risk to do something that's no one's done before, and so you have to then convince other people to kind of jump on that risk that leaky boat of risk taking. We go somewhere.
Exactly. We deal with it a lot here. I mean, a lot of stuff we work on is 9 months, a year before it hits market or whatever. With any kind of consumer products.
Well, what you're doing here with brand design, graphics, and some cut and sew stuff too as well. That stuff's like, I think the metabolism is even faster for that. And styles change, brands change. There's obviously there's sort of a futurist kind of perspective that you have to have, and then you have to be sort of courageous enough to just sort of push for it, make sure it gets out there. You know,
Go after it.
get
Yeah.
it through the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we know is that the future is probably going to be different from today.
Yeah.
And
Oh boy.
That's a given.
Yeah, I'd say yes.
sometimes a way to do that is to go back. I heard that lately you've been drawing a lot and kind of going back to basics of like using traditional, pens and painting.
Yeah.
And that can be a great way to change your process and sculpt a new version of what the future is going to be.
So how is it that you know what I'm up to?
we were chatting a little bit before you got here.
It's a little espionage. This is a little weird.
We do our research.
The way I look at it is that they want nostalgia. I think a lot of customers or consumers like something that they maybe can grasp onto that they remember from before.
Yeah.
But what's the twist that makes it more appropriate for its time and place?
Yeah.
And so you have to, like, I think some of the best designs out there right now look a little bit more retro,
They do.
but with a twist.
Yeah.
And that twist is what sort of sets it apart from, again, something that happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
And maybe it comes from the influencers in the world of rap or entertainment in some way, that they're like gravitating. Some of those artists are gravitating to older, they're even, of course, they're always sampling older music,
Absolutely.
and
yeah.
and then they twist it.
Yeah.
And the same thing might be with, they're wearing an old hoodie,
Mm-hmm.
and then they got some new shoes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There's this fun, interesting mix that they're kind of working with, and hopefully it latches on with their audience.
Well, in the apparel industry, like a parody, on a tee, if you take a graphic and do a parody off of some vintage logo or whatever, it's always going to sell well. Just in the back of your mind, that association, even if you don't really know what it is, you're like, oh, that looks cool.
Yeah, I mean, right behind you, there's a Nike shirt, and you're into cars and motorcycles. It's an obvious homage to Ed Big Daddy Roth.
So Big Daddy, I used to make those model cars with the
they're so cool.
rat fink and
rat
the
fink
big,
and,
shifting, and the crazy. I mean, I used to. That was a big deal in the 1960s, I think. Big Ed Daddy Ralph, he's great. That's a bit of nostalgia that's kind of makes people sort of remember, an earlier era, and then it helps them, I think, then accept that twist, whatever the twist is. It's kind of combined with something that's comfortable.
Yeah.
So
Very cool.
It's a good example of just paying attention to what's going on in the world.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we got to wrap this up.
Wrap it up.
Yep. We're gonna let you get on your way, but we appreciate you coming by. It's nice to finally meet you in person.
It's a lot of fun to come across the river to Vancouver because you see it. I mean, I see it from the Oregon side, and I'm like, looks like they're doing some cool stuff over there. But I never get it. Like I never really have a big reason until today. And that was super. You have a great office here.
Thank you.
And cool bunch of people that are kind of in this unique new world. Kind of this Vancouver is becoming its own kind of like a real city.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I mean, I'm excited to have been invited over.
I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, and it sort of fits with your brand image too. That you're just a little bit different. You're like you're not in the center of Portland. You just you went a little bit. Yep. You went across the river.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
We try and do things a little bit different. So
it's
cool that you recognize that.
It shows,
awesome.
and especially in the genre of trying to deal with these young urban or kind of counter sort of culture types or people who are searching for their own, and it sort of works that you just sort of just disassociate yourself from some things in order to get get to a new place.
Yep.
So I can tell.
Cool.
It's really fun. You guys are doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks. It's
Yeah.
great meeting you.
Lincoln Design, everybody.
Appreciate it.
You know.
Right on. Thank you, Tinker.
Yeah, my pleasure.